Welcome to Starbound's Fantasy channel. My name's Chikondi, and I'll be your narrator for today's story. Before we get started, please check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free, and it just helps make sure our stories pop up in your feed more often. With that said, let's get started with today's story. The morning Calyx's world ended, or perhaps began, started with perfectly ordinary godbone soup and the sound of his foster mother humming while she sharpened her forge tools. Aina always hummed when she worked, melodies that seemed to echo from the city's own throat, as if the sprawling metropolis of Umbraeth had taught her its songs. "You're burning the barley again," she called without looking up from her whetstone. Calyx stirred the pot with more enthusiasm than skill, watching steam rise from the bubbling mixture. At 16, he'd mastered the art of running the bone bridges faster than anyone in the merchant quarter, could read the city's moods in the flicker of soul lanterns, and had never once burned down Aina's forge. Cooking, however, remained a mystery as impenetrable as the dead spire itself. "It's not burning," he protested, then caught a whiff of char. "Okay, it's burning." Aina's laugh was warm as fresh-forged steel. She was a small woman, wire-thin and silver-haired, but her hands could shape godmetal like clay. The city's founders had been many things: exiles, dreamers, the desperate and the brave, but they'd all shared one trait. They'd known how to build something beautiful from the bones of the dead. The old gods had called the land the city was built on a Deathrealm, but humans had made it home. A city built on the bones of whatever gods lay at rest there, bringing life, reverence, and safety to a place once thought cursed. "Bryn's coming by after the market bell," Aina said, testing her hammer's edge. "You two planning another expedition to the Bone Wilds?" "Just the usual salvage run." Calyx ladled the soup into bowls, scraping away the worst of the burnt bits. "Nothing dangerous." Aina's eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and knowing. "And I suppose Andy's going with you, for protection?" Calyx's friend Andy was many things: loyal, fierce, occasionally terrifying, but protective wasn't the word most people used. The Chimera boy had been born when the city's divine remnants had twisted together in ways that shouldn't have worked, creating something that was part human, part beast, and entirely himself. Perhaps that was because Cal was almost as strange as Andy himself. Calyx had amber eyes that could be unsettling in certain light. People were often wary of him, despite his friendly demeanor. He was also strangely in tune with the city in ways that other humans weren't, making him feel separate from his fellow humans. "Andy doesn't protect us," Calyx said. "We all protect each other." "That's what I like to hear." Aina set down her tools and accepted the bowl. "Though I do wish you'd be more careful. The city's been restless lately." She wasn't wrong. For weeks now, Umbraeth had felt different. The bone bridges hummed with frequencies that made Calyx's teeth ache. The soul lanterns flickered in patterns that seemed almost like Morse code. And sometimes, late at night, he could swear he heard the city whispering. "It's just the Divine Kingdom making everyone nervous," Calyx said. "All those envoys asking questions, making demands." "Perhaps." Aina's spoon clinked against her bowl. "Just be careful. The city is changing." Before Calyx could ask what she meant, the room exploded into twisting geometry and melting time. The godquake struck without warning, a convulsion that went deeper than earth and stone. The floor of the forge rippled like water. The walls breathed in and out, expanding and contracting as if the building had suddenly grown lungs. Calyx's soup bowl flew from his hands and shattered against the ceiling, which had somehow become the floor. But it wasn't just the physical world that shifted. Time stuttered. For a moment, Calyx was 5 years old again, crying in the street after his birth parents had abandoned him. Then he was 30, beard grizzled and bent over a forge that wasn't Aina's. Then he was someone else entirely, a woman with amber eyes standing at the edge of a vast crater, watching the lost god die. The quake lasted forever, yet felt like seconds. When it ended, Calyx found himself pressed against what had been the wall but was now definitely the floor, his ears ringing and his vision swimming with after-images of places he'd never been. Aina! His voice came out cracked and small. She was sitting in the corner, or perhaps it was the center. The room's geometry had become negotiable, staring at her hands as if she'd never seen them before. "The city," she whispered. "The city is stirring." The merchant quarter looked like a child's toys scattered by a giant's tantrum. Buildings had twisted into impossible shapes, their bone and mortar construction flowing like liquid before hardening into new configurations. The great bridge, which had spanned the Sorrow Canal for 300 years, now formed a perfect spiral that disappeared into the clouded sky. Calyx picked his way through the debris, his eyes watering from the strange light that leaked from cracks in the pavement. The godquake had ended, but its effects lingered like a fever dream. People wandered the streets with confused expressions, some laughing, others crying, a few speaking in languages that had been dead for centuries. "Calyx!" Bryn's voice cut through the chaos. He turned to see his best friend vaulting over a pile of rubble with characteristic grace. At 17, Bryn was everything Calyx wasn't. Tall where he was short, confident where he was awkward, practical where he was dreamy. Her dark hair was pulled back in a smith's braid, and her leather apron was stained with something that definitely wasn't soot. "Thank the gods you're all right," she said, grabbing him in a hug that smelled of metal and worry. "I was in the undermarket when it hit. Half the vendors just vanished. Not dead, vanished, like they'd never existed at all." "Where's Andy?" Calyx asked. "Here!" The Chimera boy materialized from behind an overturned cart, moving with the fluid grace of something that had never been entirely human. Andy was their age, but looked older, his features sharp and predatory. Bone-white hair fell across eyes that shifted color like oil on water, and when he smiled, his teeth were too sharp. "The city screams," Andy's voice echoed. "It remembers pain." "What kind of pain?" Calyx asked. "Birth pain, death pain, the pain of becoming something new." "Born from what?" Bryn kicked at a chunk of masonry that had somehow grown tiny flowers. "And into what?" Before anyone could answer, a new voice cut through the din. "Citizens of Umbraeth!" The words rang out with divine authority, amplified by crystalline speakers that had sprouted from the twisted remains of the market bell. "By order of the blessed hierarchy, you are commanded to gather in the central plaza for emergency sanctification." The three friends exchanged glances. The Divine Kingdom's envoys had been in the city for weeks, but they'd never been so bold as to issue commands. "Sanctification?" Bryn's hand moved instinctively to the hammer at her belt. "That doesn't sound friendly." "They smell of fear," Andy added, "and lies." "Then we don't go to the plaza," Calyx said. "We go to the Bone Wilds. If the city's changing, we need to understand why. I bet it's something to do with the Divine Kingdom invading. The city hasn't been right since." "They want to cleanse our city. They think we're cursed just from living here," Andy said. "The Bone Wilds?" Bryn's eyebrows shot up. "After what just happened? Calyx, that's where the answers are." Calyx pulled something from his pocket, a bone slab about the size of his palm, covered in glyphs that seemed to shift and writhe when he wasn't looking directly at them. "I found this in the forge after the quake. It's a map." Bryn leaned closer, her smith's eye examining the artifact. "That's not bone. That's godbone. Living godbone." She looked up at him, her expression grave. "Calyx, this is pointing to the Dead Spire." The Dead Spire. The impossible tower at the edge of the Bone Wilds, where the first builders of Umbraeth had vanished without a trace. It was myth made manifest, a structure that existed in the space between dream and reality. "Then that's where we go," Calyx said, surprised by his own certainty. "Yes," Andy agreed. "The tower calls. We must listen." You're both insane, Bryn said, but she was already checking her pack, her movements brisk and efficient. Absolutely, completely insane. Will you come with us? Calyx asked. Bryn looked at him, then at Andy, then at the chaos spreading through their city as Divine Kingdom forces moved through the streets with weapons drawn and purpose in their stride. Someone has to keep you idiots alive, she said. The Bone Wilds began where the city ended, which was to say they began wherever they pleased. The godquake had scrambled the geography, turning the familiar outskirts of Umbraeth into a labyrinth of crystalline forests and pearl-bone meadows. Ancient divine energy crackled through the air like heat lightning, and the horizon bent in directions that shouldn't exist. The map's changing, Calyx said, squinting at the bone slab. The glyphs rippled across its surface like living things, constantly rewriting themselves. It's like it's thinking. Maps don't think, Bryn said, but she didn't sound convinced. Nothing about this journey felt normal. They'd been walking for hours, but the sun hadn't moved in the sky. Worse, they'd passed the same grove of singing trees 3 times, despite never turning around. Time is broken here, Andy observed. The gods' death dreams bleed through. What do you mean, death dreams? Calyx asked. When gods die, they dream of what they were. The dreams become real. We walk through their memories. As if summoned by Andy's words, the landscape around them shimmered. For a moment, they weren't in the Bone Wilds at all, but standing in a vast temple made of starlight and sorrow. Figures in robes of liquid shadow moved through the space, their faces obscured, but their grief palpable. The morning conclave, Bryn breathed. I've seen this in the old tapestries. This is where the gods gathered to die. The vision faded, leaving them back in the twisted wilderness, but the feelings lingered, a sense of profound loss, of sacrifice beyond measure. Why would gods choose to die? Calyx asked. Gods don't just up and die unless they are killed by other gods. Because they loved something more than themselves, Andy replied. They loved the world enough to let it grow beyond them. They walked in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. The bone slab grew warm in Calyx's hands, its glyphs pulsing with increased urgency. Ahead, the dead spire had begun to appear, first as a trick of the light, then as a distant needle against the sky, finally as an impossible tower that seemed to be built from crystallized time itself. It's beautiful, Bryn said softly. It was. The dead spire rose from the earth like a prayer made manifest, its spiraling structures catching and reflecting light that came from no visible source. Each level was different, some made of bone, others of crystal, still others of substances that had no names. It was unfinished, its top lost in clouds, but it radiated a sense of purpose that made Calyx's chest tight with emotion. It's growing, he realized. What happens when it's finished? Bryn asked. Perhaps it's never meant to be finished. Perhaps the growing is the point, Andy said. Divine Kingdom knights burst from concealment among the bone trees, their armor gleaming with sanctified steel and their weapons humming with holy power. They moved as a unit that had fought together for years, and their leader was a woman in the robes of a kingdom priestess, her face marked with the ritual scars of the faithful. Stand down, heretics, she commanded. By the order of the blessed hierarchy, you are under arrest for blasphemous archaeology. Blasphemous archaeology? Bryn's hand moved to her hammer. That's a new one. The dead spire is forbidden, the priestess continued. Its secrets are not for mortal minds. Surrender now and your purification will be swift. Calyx felt the bone slab pulse in his hands, its glyphs flaring with sudden light. We're not surrendering, he said. Then you will be purified by force. The priestess raised her weapon, a staff crowned with divine crystal. Soldiers, advance! The battle was brief but brutal. Bryn's hammer sang through the air, her smith's strength easily a match for the knight's sanctified steel. Andy moved like liquid shadow, his chimera nature giving him advantages no human warrior could match. but they were outnumbered, and the knights were experienced. The dead spire's tower light suddenly blazed brighter, and the air around them filled with the sound of distant voices, not threatening, but welcoming. The divine knights stumbled, their weapons flickering as competing energies warred in the space around them.
"What is happening?"
the priestess gasped.
"The dead spire is dead! It's been dead for centuries!"
"Nothing here is dead," Calyx said. The priestess stared at Cal.
"Then it is undead, and you are cursed!"
"Cursed or gifted?" Cal stepped toward her. The bone slab in his hands erupted with light, and everyone's center of gravity changed as the surrounding area erupted into a godquake. When the light faded, only Calyx, Bryn, and Andy remained standing. The Divine Kingdom Knights lay unconscious in the pearl bone grass, their weapons dark and harmless. But the priestess was awake, her scarred face pale with shock.
"What did you do?"
she whispered. "I didn't do anything," Calyx said, helping her to her feet. "The dead spire did." The priestess stared at the tower, her trained eye taking in details that Calyx had missed.
"The architecture! This would mean that it's not built! It's grown! Like a living thing!"
"Because it is a living thing,"
Bryn said, her hammer still ready but lowered.
"Just like the city, just like everything the gods left behind. We are connected to our land, just as you are connected to your faith."
Bryn gripped her hammer tighter.
"We just don't crucify you for your way of living."
"The gods left nothing behind,"
the priestess said automatically.
"They ascended to their eternal glory, leaving only their divine commandments for us to follow."
"She speaks the words," Andy observed quietly to Bryn and Cal, "but her heart no longer believes them." "What's your name?" Calyx asked the priestess. The priestess hesitated.
"Luma! I am Luma the Faithful, seeker of the third circle, servant of the blessed hierarchy."
Luma looked at him with eyes that were older than her 25 years.
"I came here to spy on the dead spire, to map its defenses so the kingdom's army could destroy it. But what I've seen—"
She shook her head.
"I saw visions when your bone slab activated. The grief in the tower's light. That wasn't divine command. That was divine sacrifice."
"Will you help us?"
Bryn asked, loosening her grip on her hammer.
"You could show the kingdom that we are not cursed. You've seen it yourself now."
"Help you do what?"
Luma asked.
"Even if I am a priestess, they will need more evidence than my deviation."
"Learn the truth," Calyx said. "About the city, about the gods, about why everyone's so afraid of what we might find. Maybe we'll find something to help you convince your people." Luma was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between the three friends and the tower that rose before them. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but sad.
"The kingdom's army is 3 days behind me. They're bringing siege engines blessed by the Hierophants themselves. If I don't report back with intelligence about the dead spire's defenses, they'll assume I'm dead and proceed with the attack."
"Then we have 3 days to find the truth," Calyx said.
"And if the truth isn't what they want to hear?"
Bryn asked. Calyx looked at the bone slab, its glyphs now pointing directly at the dead spire's base. "Then at least we'll know what we're fighting for." "Or dying for," Andy added, but not without fondness. Together, the four of them approached the tower. Up close, it was even more magnificent, and more alien. The lowest level was made of bones so ancient they'd turned to pearl, inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift meaning as Calyx watched. The next level was crystal, clear as water but humming with contained energy. Above that, materials that had no earthly names.
"There's no door,"
Bryn observed.
"There is,"
Luma said softly.
"but it's not a door for the body. It's a door for the mind."
She was right. As they stood before the tower's base, Calyx felt something tugging at the edges of his consciousness. The bone slab grew warm in his hands, its glyphs reaching toward the symbols on the tower wall. It wants us to remember, he said.
Remember what?
Bryn asked.
The city's origin.
Calyx pressed the bone slab against the tower's wall, and reality exploded into memory. The memory was vast, older than the city, older than the kingdom, older than the recorded history of the world. It unfolded like a flower made of light and sorrow, each petal a moment of divine grace. Calyx was no longer Calyx. He was Vaelthis, the lost god, standing at the edge of the world as his siblings chose their fates. Some ascended to become distant stars, others retreated into dreams from which they would never wake. But Vaelthis looked at the mortals below, humans scratching out lives in the dirt, building their small communities, loving and dying and dreaming of something greater, and made a different choice. I will not abandon them, he said to the dying sky. I will not force them to worship what they cannot understand. I will give them the tools to build something new. The memory shifted, and Calyx was watching the first humans arrive at the crater where Vaelthis had chosen to die. They were exiles, refugees, the broken and the desperate. They'd been cast out from the kingdom for heresy, for asking questions that had no approved answers.
How do we build a city on the bones of a god?
Asked a woman with amber eyes. Calyx's own eyes, he realized, though she'd lived centuries before his birth. Not on the bones, corrected an old man with a smith's hands. With the bones. The god gave itself freely. We honor that gift by using it wisely. He took the woman's hands to comfort her. We have nowhere else to go. And so they built, not a monument to divine power, but a home for human hearts. They raised bridges from divine bone, not to reach heaven, but to connect neighborhoods. They carved soul lanterns from god tears to light the way for children walking home after dark. They took the raw stuff of divinity and transformed it into something beautifully, defiantly mortal. The memory shifted again, and Calyx was in the dead spire itself, watching the first builders as they created their monument to memory. But it wasn't a monument to the god. It was a monument to the choice they'd made.
What if we are wrong?
Asked a young woman, her hands shaking as she carved symbols into the tower's base.
What if the god regrets its sacrifice? What if it wants to return? Then it will return, said the amber-eyed woman. But it will return to a world that chose to grow beyond it. And perhaps that's exactly what it wanted. But first, it starts with us. It starts here. From now on, we govern ourselves. Here, humans control their own fate.
The memory faded, leaving Calyx gasping in the present. He was himself again, standing before the dead spire with his friends, but the weight of what he'd seen pressed down on him like a physical thing.
The city, he said. It was never built to last forever. It was built to prove a point. What point? Luma asked, her voice hollow. That humans don't need gods to be divine. The kingdom's entire power structure depends on people believing they need divine guidance,
Luma said slowly.
If Umbraeth proves that humans can govern themselves, create beauty, build something lasting without gods, then every human in the kingdom starts asking why they need kings and priests,
Calyx finished. A new sound cut through their conversation, a low thrumming note that seemed to come from the earth itself. The dead spire's light suddenly blazed brighter, and symbols began appearing on its walls, urgent and bright.
It's a warning,
Luma said, her priestly training allowing her to read the divine script.
The army has reached the city. They're not waiting 3 days. They're attacking now. Then we go back,
Bryn said immediately.
We defend our home. With what?
Luma asked.
The 4 of us against an army blessed by the Hierophants themselves?
With the truth, Calyx said, understanding flooding through him. The dead spire isn't just a monument to memory. It's a transmitter. It can share what it remembers with anyone willing to see. With this, Cal held up the bone slab, we can show everyone that corrupt kings and false faiths are no longer needed. He pressed his hand against the tower's wall, feeling the pulse of ancient power beneath his palm. See for yourselves. Calyx looked at his friends, Bryn with her loyalty and strength, Andy with his fierce protective instincts, Luma with her newfound courage to question everything she'd been taught. Then he looked at the dead spire, growing even as they watched, adding new levels made of hope and determination. He held up the bone slab, and a soft glow emanated from it. Instead of reality shattering into a godquake, it softly shifted, showing everyone the vision that Cal himself had seen. The journey back to Umbraeth took them through landscapes that were rewriting themselves in real time. The godquake had started something that wouldn't be stopped, a cascade of awakening that spread outward from the city in waves of transformed reality. Ancient battlefields bloomed with flowers that sung lullabies. Ruined temples rebuilt themselves in the space between heartbeats. The very air shimmered with possibility. But it was the smoke on the horizon that drew their attention. Umbraeth was burning.
They're performing a cleansing,
Luma said, her face pale as she read the distant signs.
They mean to wipe the city from existence.
The city fights back, Andy said. I can feel it from here. It refuses to be forgotten. He was right. Even from a distance, Calyx could sense Umbraeth's defiance. The bone bridges were singing battle hymns. The soul lanterns blazed with fierce light. The city itself had become a living symbol of resistance.
We need to get closer. We need to get closer,
Bryn said, but even as she spoke, figures emerged from the forest ahead. More Divine Kingdom knights, but these weren't scouts or troops. These were the Purifiers, elite warriors whose armor bore the marks of divine possession. Citizens of the false city, their leader called out, his voice carrying the artificial authority of divine augmentation. You are commanded to cease your heretical activities and submit to purification.
Counteroffer,
Bryn said, raising her hammer.
You can piss off.
The Purifier's response was swift and brutal. Divine energy launched out from his weapon, a spear of solid light that should have reduced Bryn to ash. Instead, it struck an invisible barrier and dissipated harmlessly. Calyx looked down at the bone slab in his hands. It was glowing brighter than ever, its symbols matching the ones that had appeared on the dead spire.
The tower,
he said.
It's protecting us.
The curse! The Purifier snarled. The dead spire is an abomination. We cannot let it gain more power.
Please, listen to me,
Luma said, stepping forward.
I have seen the vision. The kingdom has misunderstood the dead spire. We must...
You are cursed! A pained expression came over Luma, realizing her people would never listen to just her words. They would only view her as corrupted, cursed. She reached for the bone slab in Calyx's hand and raised it above their heads. Calyx felt the world shift around them. It was gentle, like the last time. A simple tuning, like adjusting the strings of a vast instrument. The Purifiers stumbled, their divine augmentations flickering as competing energies warred in the space around them. What are you doing? Their leader demanded.
I'm showing them the truth,
Luma said. The memory pulse that erupted from the bone slab was different this time. Instead of the vast, overwhelming vision of the god sacrifice, it was smaller, more personal. It showed the Purifiers not what they were supposed to believe, but what they had actually experienced. Calyx saw flashes of their lives, childhoods spent in poverty while the hierarchy lived in luxury, families torn apart by divine decree, questions silenced by force rather than answered with wisdom. He saw their doubt, carefully buried beneath layers of indoctrination, and their fear of what might happen if they dared to voice it. Then the memory shifted into the god's sacrifice, the vision of the city's founders as they built the city into a place of rebirth and freedom. No! the leader whispered, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers.
We serve the divine will. We are blessed. We are...
You are human, Calyx said simply. Just like us. The purifiers stared at him, their faces cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been hope. One by one, their divine augmentations flickered and died, leaving them standing in armor that was merely metal, carrying weapons that were merely steel.
"What have you done to us?"
one of them asked.
"We've set you free,"
Luma said.
"The question is, what you'll do with that freedom."
The purifiers looked at each other, then at the smoke rising from Umbraeth, then at the dead spire glowing on the horizon. Their leader, former leader, Calyx supposed, removed his helmet, revealing a face that was younger than his voice had suggested. "The cleansing," he said. "We have to stop the cleansing."
"Can you?"
Bryn asked. "Not alone, but if what you've shown us is true, if the city itself is fighting back." He looked at his men. "We swore an oath to serve the divine will. Maybe it's time we figured out what that actually means." Umbraeth was dying, but it was not dying quietly. The divine kingdom's siege engines had breached the outer walls, their blessed artillery reducing ancient bone bridges to rubble. But for every structure they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The city was rebuilding itself faster than they could tear it down, drawing on power sources that the attackers couldn't understand.
"It's beautiful,"
Luma whispered as they crested the final hill.
"Terrible, but beautiful."
She was right. The battle for Umbraeth was unlike anything in recorded history. The kingdom's forces attacked with weapons of divine fire and sanctified steel, while the city defended itself with constructs of living memory. Bone giants strode through the streets, their bodies made from the accumulated dreams of generations. Spirit echoes of the first builders flickered through the combat zones, their presence disrupting the enemy's divine augmentations. But it wasn't enough. The kingdom's army was vast, and their hierophants were channeling power from the divine realm itself. Slowly, inevitably, they were winning. "The heart chamber," Calyx said, pointing toward the city's center. "If we can reach the heart chamber, we can turn the tide." "What's in the heart chamber?" asked the former purifier, who had introduced himself as Uriel.
"The city's core,"
Bryn said.
"where the first builders placed the god's heart."
"If that's true," Uriel said, "then it's also where the hierophants will focus their attack. They'll try to corrupt the heart directly." Calyx closed his eyes and reached out with senses he didn't fully understand. There, in the heart chamber, where Aina had taught him to feel the city's pulse, something was wrong. The steady rhythm that had been Umbraeth's heartbeat for centuries was growing erratic, stuttering like a dying engine. He pulled out the bone slab, its glyphs now so bright they hurt to look at directly. "The dead spire isn't just a monument or a transmitter. It's a key to the city's deepest secrets."
"What secrets?"
Bryn asked. "The secret of what the god actually gave us," Calyx said. "Not just its bones and blood, but its choice, its willingness to let something new be born from its sacrifice." The bone slab pulsed, and suddenly Calyx could see the city as it truly was, not just buildings and streets, but a vast network of interconnected consciousness. Every person who had ever lived in Umbraeth, every dream they'd dreamed, every hope they'd harbored, every love they'd lost, all of it was part of the city's living soul. "It's not just a place," he breathed. "It's a people. All the people who ever chose to build something beautiful instead of destroying something different." "Then we fight for them," Uriel said. "All of them." Together they made their way through the burning streets. The city helped them, opening paths through the rubble, guiding them around the worst of the fighting. But as they approached the heart chamber, the resistance grew stronger. Divine Kingdom forces had surrounded the ancient building, their weapons trained on anyone who tried to approach.
"There!"
Luma pointed to a side entrance.
The Pilgrim's Gate. I can get us inside. Can you?
Bryn asked.
I'm still a priestess,
Luma said.
just not their priestess anymore.
She led them through winding corridors carved from living bone, past chambers where the city's memories were stored in crystalline matrices. The heart chamber lay at the center of it all, a vast sphere that pulsed with the rhythm of Umbraeth's life. But it wasn't empty. 3 figures in the robes of the Hierophants stood around the chamber's central dais, their hands raised in a ritual that was slowly draining the city's power. And lying on the dais, glowing with fading light, was Aina.
Mother,
Calyx whispered. Aina's eyes opened, focusing on him with effort.
Calyx, you came back.
What are they doing to you? He asked, but even as he spoke, he understood. The city's consciousness was too vast for any single mind to contain. It needed a vessel, a conduit, and Aina, who had spent her life listening to the city's songs, had become that conduit.
They're trying to break the connection,
she said, her voice barely a whisper.
to sever the link between the city and its people. If they succeed...
The city dies, Calyx finished.
That's not going to happen,
Bryn said, raising her hammer.
Indeed it is not,
said one of the Hierophants, turning to face them.
because you are too late.
The ritual reached its crescendo, and Aina screamed. It was more than shrieking sound. It was the city's death cry, the sound of a living thing being forced back into mere matter. The heart chamber shuddered, its walls crackling as the divine energy that had sustained it for centuries began to fade. Stop! Calyx lunged toward the dais, but invisible barriers held him back. The Hierophant's ritual was too strong, their combined power too great.
You cannot stop what has already begun,
the lead Hierophant said, his voice resonating with divine authority.
The false city will return to dust, and order will be restored.
Whose order?
Luna demanded, stepping forward.
Yours? The kingdom's? Or the order that comes from free minds choosing to work together?
There is only one order,
the Hierophant replied.
the divine order, as decreed by the gods themselves.
The gods are dead, Calyx said. You're just wearing their corpses like costumes. The Hierophant's face twisted with rage.
Blasphemy! The gods are eternal, their will immutable.
Then where are they?
Bryn asked.
If they're so eternal, why do they need you to speak for them?
The question hung in the air like a blade. For a moment, doubt flickered across the Hierophant's face. Then his expression hardened again.
Faith requires no proof, he said. Only obedience.
Faith without questions isn't faith,
Luma said.
It's fear.
The ritual reached its peak. Aina convulsed on the dais, her body racked with pain as the city's consciousness was torn away from her. But in that moment of agony, she looked at Calyx with eyes that burned like stars.
The choice,
she whispered.
The god's choice. It's not about death, Calyx. It's about transformation.
Understanding flooded through him like liquid fire. The bone slab in his hands wasn't just a map or a key. It was a fragment of the god's final decision, crystallized in divine matter. And that decision hadn't been to die. It had been to become something new. Andy, he said aloud, can you hear me?
Always, the Chimera replied. But the pain is growing stronger. The city is forgetting how to dream.
Then we remind it, Calyx said. All of us together. He raised the bone slab, and its light blazed brighter than ever before. But this time, he wasn't trying to access the god's memories. He was adding his own. The memory pulse that erupted from the slab was warm and golden, filled with everything Calyx loved about Umbraeth. Aina's laughter as she taught him to work the forge, Bryn's determined face as she helped him climb the highest bone bridge, Andy's fierce protectiveness wrapped in telepathic warmth, the smell of god bone soup on winter mornings, the sound of the city humming itself to sleep. But it wasn't just his memories. Bryn added her own, the pride of creating something beautiful with her hands, the satisfaction of a job well done, the joy of friendship tested and proven true. Luma contributed her memories of doubt and discovery, the terrible beauty of questioning everything she'd been taught. Even Uriel and his former purifiers added their voices, their memories of choosing compassion over duty. The Hierophant's ritual faltered as the memory pulse washed over them. Their divine augmentations flickered, unable to process the raw humanity of what they were experiencing. "What is this?" the lead Hierophant gasped. "This is what the god chose," Calyx said. "Not death, but transformation. Not ending, but beginning. The god didn't die. It became us. All of us. Every human who ever chose to build something beautiful instead of destroying something different." The truth of it hit the Hierophants like a physical blow. Their ritual collapsed, its divine energy dissipating harmlessly. Aina sat up on the dais, no longer racked with pain, but glowing with soft, steady light.
"The city remembers,"
she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from the walls themselves.
"It remembers what it chose to become."
"This is impossible," the lead Hierophant said. "The gods cannot be contained in mortal flesh."
"Who said anything about containing them?" Calyx asked. "We're not trying to capture divinity. We're trying to become it."
The heart chamber filled with light, not the harsh glare of divine command, but the warm glow of human dreams made manifest. The city's heartbeat, which had been fading, grew strong again, stronger than ever before.
"The ritual!"
one of the other Hierophants said.
"We have to complete the ritual!"
But they couldn't. The power they'd been channeling was no longer theirs to command. It belonged to the city now, to the people who had chosen to make it their home. And those people were done being told what to think.
"It's over,"
Luma said gently.
"The cleansing has failed."
"No!" the lead Hierophant said. "No! This cannot be! The kingdom's army—" "It's surrendering," Uriel said, listening to something only he could hear through his military communication device. "The constructs aren't attacking anymore. They're just standing there, waiting."
"Waiting for what?"
Bryn asked. "For us to choose," Calyx said. "The city won't fight anymore. It doesn't need to. It's proven its point." "What point?" the Hierophant demanded. Calyx looked at the man, really looked at him. Beneath the robes and the divine augmentations, he was just another human being, terrified of a world that didn't need him to interpret it. "That we don't need permission to be divine," Calyx said. "We just need the courage to choose love over fear." The Hierophant stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he sank to his knees. "I don't understand," he whispered.
"That's okay,"
Aina said, rising from the dais.
"Understanding comes with time, but choosing can happen right now."
She walked over to the Hierophant and offered him her hand.
"Would you like to see what we've built? Really see it? Not through the lens of doctrine or fear, but through the eyes of the people who call it home."
The Hierophant looked at her hand like it might bite him. Then, with visible effort, he reached out and took it. The change was immediate. His divine augmentations dissolved, leaving him standing in simple robes, his face wet with tears. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's so beautiful."
"Yes,"
Aina said simply.
"it is."
The siege of Umbraeth ended not with a bang, but with a song. It started in the heart chamber, where Aina hummed the melody she'd been humming all of Calyx's life. But now he could hear it for what it truly was, not just a smith's tune, but the city's lullaby, the song it sang to itself in the quiet hours before dawn. The song spread through the bone bridges and crystal corridors, carried by the wind that blew through the soul lanterns. The city's defenders heard it first, their weapons lowering as they listened. Then the divine kingdom's knights, their armor clattering as they set down their arms. Finally, the Hierophants themselves, their faces streaked with tears as they heard the voice of the god they'd been claiming to serve. But it wasn't the god singing. It was everyone. Every person who had ever lived in Umbraeth, every dream they'd dreamed, every hope they'd harbored. The song was the sound of humanity choosing to be divine.
What happens now?
Luma asked as they stood on the Heart Chamber's balcony, watching the sun rise over a city that had been transformed by its own refusal to die.
Now we rebuild,
Bryn said.
Not just the buildings, but the relationships, the trust.
The Divine Kingdom's army won't just go away, Uriel pointed out. They'll want explanations, orders, some kind of structure to return to.
Then we give them one, Caelix said. Not the old structure, based on fear and control, but something new, something based on choice.
Dead Spire grows, Andy observed.
It adds new levels even as we speak. The tower remembers what happened here.
He was right. In the distance, the impossible tower was visibly taller than it had been the day before, its spiral reaching toward the sky like a prayer made manifest. But it wasn't the only thing growing. Throughout the city, new structures were appearing, not built by human hands, but grown from the dreams and hopes of the people who lived there.
The city is becoming what it was always meant to be,
Aina said.
Not just a place to live, but a place to become. Become what?
Luma asked. Whatever we choose, Caelix said. That's the point. That's what the gods gave us. Not commandments or restrictions, but the freedom to choose what we want to become.
Over the following days, the transformation continued. The Divine Kingdom's army, faced with a city that wouldn't fight, but also wouldn't surrender, found themselves in a situation their training hadn't prepared them for. Some tried to continue the siege, but their weapons wouldn't fire. Others attempted to leave, but found their supply lines cut off by crystalline forests that had grown overnight.
It's not keeping us prisoner,
one of the generals complained to Uriel.
It's just not letting us leave until we've learned something.
What's it trying to teach us? Uriel asked.
That we have a choice,
Caelix said. He'd been spending his days moving through the camps, talking to knights and officers, sharing the memories stored in the bone slab.
You can go back to the kingdom and report that the heretics have been defeated, or you can stay and help us build something new.
And if we stay? The general asked.
Then you become part of the story, Caelix said. Not the story of divine conquest, but the story of human cooperation.
It wasn't an easy choice for everyone. Some of the kingdom's forces chose to leave, and the city let them go, their memories gently edited to remove the traumatic aspects of what they'd experienced. They would return to their homes with tales of a city that had simply vanished, a mystery that would puzzle scholars for generations. But others chose to stay. They laid down their weapons and picked up tools, helping to repair the damage their siege had caused. They listened to the city's songs and learned to add their own voices to the choir.
It's not conversion,
Luma explained to a group of confused priests.
It's not about changing your beliefs. It's about expanding them.
How do you expand a belief? One of them asked.
By asking questions,
she said.
By admitting that you don't know everything. By being willing to learn.
The Dead Spire continued to grow, adding new levels with each revelation, each moment of understanding. Scholars from across the world came to study it, but they found that the tower couldn't be understood through traditional means. It had to be experienced, felt, lived. It's not just a building, wrote one researcher in his journal. It's a library of human experience, a monument to the idea that we can become more than we are without losing what we were. The city itself was changing too. The bone bridges hummed with new harmonies. The soul lanterns blazed with colors that had no names. Gardens grew in spaces that had been empty lots, their flowers blooming in patterns that told stories of loss and renewal.
"We are becoming something new,"
Aina said one evening as she and Calyx watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson.
"Not just the city, but all of us. Humans and chimeras, believers and skeptics, natives and refugees."
"What are we becoming?" Calyx asked.
"I don't know,"
she admitted.
"but I think that's the point. The god didn't give us a destination. It gave us a journey."
"And the courage to take it," Calyx added.
"Yes,"
she said.
"the courage to choose love over fear, growth over stagnation, questions over answers."
"Even when it's hard?"
"Especially when it's hard."
They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city's lights begin to twinkle in the gathering dusk. In the distance, the dead spire glowed with soft radiance, its latest level still taking shape as someone, somewhere, learned something new about themselves. "Do you think we'll ever finish it?" Calyx asked.
"I hope not,"
Aina said.
"The day we stop growing is the day we stop being human.
And if we stop being human?"
"Then we become something else, something smaller."
She squeezed his hand.
"But I don't think that's going to happen. Not as long as there are people like you asking questions like that."
"People like us," Calyx corrected.
"Yes,"
she said.
"People like us."
They listened, and in the distance, carried on the wind that blew through the soul lanterns, they could hear it. The song of Umbraeth, the lullaby of a city that had chosen to become more than stone and bone. It was the sound of humanity learning to be divine. In the years that followed, the dead spire grew until it touched the clouds. The city of Umbraeth became a beacon for those who sought to build rather than destroy, to question rather than blindly follow, to choose love over fear. It wasn't perfect. Perfection wasn't the point. The point was the choosing itself, the daily decision to become something better than what you were. And in the end, that's what the lost god had given them. Not a destination, but a journey. Not answers, but the courage to ask questions. Not commandments, but the freedom to choose. The freedom to be human. The freedom to be divine. The freedom to be what comes after. The end.